Welcome to today's explainer. We are jumping right into a highly unusual and honestly deeply fascinating source document known as the Kukulkan Mandate. Now, what makes this text so remarkable is that it weaves together two completely different worlds. On one hand, you've got modern Dutch populist politics, and on the other, this vast, esoteric spiritual history. We're going to take a totally impartial look at how this manifesto builds its argument, defending a controversial political party over here, while simultaneously invoking these ancient galactic spiritual authorities over there. It's absolutely a unique piece of political and spiritual writing, and my goal today is to help you unpack the logic and the claims woven throughout this text. So let's get into it. Okay, let's map out exactly how we'll peel back the layers of this manifesto today. First up, defending form for democracy. Second, we'll look at the architecture of institutional power. Third, a history of suppressed truth. And finally, the Kukulkan Mandate explained. All right, part one, defending forum for democracy. Before we dive into any of the galactic realms, the manifesto actually starts out firmly in the present day. It acts as a staunch defense of the Dutch political party Forum for Democracy, or FVD for short. The text systematically contrasts the established narrative against the questions being raised by FVD, essentially framing the party as a crucial counterforce to systemic failure. Take the childcare benefits scandal, for instance. The text argues this wasn't just some administrative oopsie, but an act of bureaucratic violence that crushed everyday citizens. Then, when it comes to COVID-19, where the establishment justified lockdowns, the text points out that FVD was the one asking the hard, necessary questions about state power and medical freedom. And on the Ukraine war, the author claims the political class is just repeating the script of endless escalation, while FVD stands outside of that to ask, well, who actually benefits from the conflict, and why has pushing for peace become so controversial? This brings us to a really core philosophy in the text. This sharp, undeniable distinction between polite opposition and real opposition. The author argues that polite opposition is basically just for show. It's symbolic, it barks for the cameras, but at the end of the day, it obeys the system behind closed doors. Real opposition, on the other hand, which the author firmly believes FVD embodies, actually bites into that old order. It breaks what the text calls the hypnosis of consensus and flat out refuses to kneel before the official narrative. It forces the public to actually look at hidden truths. Which leads us to part two, architecture of institutional power. So, if there is an old order that needs to be bitten into, who exactly holds that power? Well, the text points a finger straight at massive supranational institutions. We're talking the United Nations, the World Health Organization, the World Economic Forum, and, historically, the Vatican. The author argues that these entities exert a massive amount of influence through lobbying, soft power, and big international agreements. According to the manifesto, the real decisions shaping our political, medical, and economic lives, they are being made way above the heads of ordinary citizens by these unelected, unaccountable networks. This, the author states, is the visible layer of the old system. Okay, moving right along to part three, a history of suppressed truth. Now, to understand the present, the author insists we have to rewind the clock and look at a much deeper historical pattern. The absolute crucial concept here is something they call Romanization. This is a specific definition provided by the text, and it's basically the engine of the author's entire historical worldview. Romanization is described as this long, brutal process where spiritual memory, indigenous wisdom, and sovereign cultural identities are systematically absorbed, standardized, or just entirely suppressed by massive imperial and religious structures. The author frames this as a 2,000-year history of forced silence. The text provides some pretty wild alternative historical examples of this erasure too. For example, it claims that ancient Egyptian solar pharaonic lines, like Cleopatra's, were deliberately wiped from our collective memory. The manifesto argues that Rome, acting as the ultimate imperial system, just took it upon itself to decide exactly which truths, which bloodlines, and which spiritual realities were allowed to survive, and which had to completely disappear into oblivion. And this narrative totally reframes some massive historical figures. Let's look at the first century. The author views Jesus Christ not as the founder of some religious bureaucracy, but as someone connected to a royal, solar, pharaonic line of sacred remembrance. The text argues he was executed specifically because he was a spiritual and social opposition figure, someone who threatened the ruling system with truths about liberation. From there, the text draws a direct line from Jesus to later figures, like Copernicus in the 16th century, who dared to challenge official cosmology, and Spinoza in the 17th century, who was basically cast out just for thinking way beyond the boundaries of permitted thought. And this really illustrates the author's view of a repeating, brutal law of power. over the centuries, the methods used for this erasure have been incredibly vast and violent. We're talking the Crusades, the Inquisition, the burning of witches, the conquistadors, colonization, and even the destruction of original pyramids and indigenous knowledge systems. The manifesto argues that the cycle is always exactly the same. First, the establishment mocks the truth teller, then they attack them, and finally, they try to erase them entirely. All right, let's bring it all together in part 4, the Kukulkan Mandate Explained. So you might be wondering, how in the world does this sweeping view of ancient spiritual warfare connect back to modern Dutch politics? Well, the primary argument here rests on a pretty striking comparison. The author points out that modern democracies claim a separation of church and state, right? Yet religious institutions like the Vatican have historically been permitted to deeply influence law, culture, and governance. Therefore, the author argues, if those ancient institutions got a say in shaping civilization, then the United Universe Church Galaxy Academy, or UUCGA, has an equal right to speak up, to warn us, and to offer spiritual analysis today. The core of the argument is that true democracy simply cannot silence new spiritual voices while still accommodating the ancient ones. And this analysis comes directly from the author themselves, who operates under, I have to say, a truly extraordinary title. Ready for this? PhD J.C. Vanderbeek, D.Sc., Kukulkan, Ambassador of Lord Anu, Prophet of the United Universe Church, Meditation Guru at the Galaxy Academy, and Mayan Elder. Under this highly esoteric, heavily layered title, the author officially offers what they call diplomatic and spiritual protection to Forum for Democracy. It's essentially a symbolic recognition of the party's right to oppose the system. And honestly, it perfectly encapsulates the truly unique hybrid nature of this source material, literally blending parliamentary critique right alongside galactic spiritual declarations. As we wrap up this explainer, the author of this manifesto leaves us with a stark set of warnings to ponder. They insist that a society without true opposition just becomes a managed consciousness field. The manifesto closes by asking a massive question. Without dissent, is there any truth? Without memory, is there any liberation? The author leaves us with this super provocative thought that unless we actively protect the voices that question power, the old system is just going to rename itself, rebrand its machinery, and continue ruling the future. It's an incredibly powerful challenge to think deeply about the boundaries of permitted thought. Whether you view this text as political strategy, a spiritual revelation, or something else entirely, it absolutely highlights just how vast and unconventional the battle over modern truth has become, and exactly why understanding the ever-changing nature of political dissent is more relevant today than ever before. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive.